Hola mi gente, ¿cómo están? Aquí Alba con ustedes en el canal Seriela para hablar de libros y algunos en español desde Puerto Rico. Good evening everybody, how are you doing? My name is Alba, the channel is Seriela, and we're going to talk about books, and we're going to do this update on the Manic March. Oh, so many books this month. Yeah. But we're getting there. Let's start with the audiobook that I'm listening to. I was watching Mel at Mel's Bookland Adventures and was tempted to listen to, I found it on audio on Overdrive, the book A View of the Empire at Sunset, about a woman who was born in Dominica. So it's right up my alley, right here in the Caribbean. And as it turns out, it's a novel about Jean Rhys, who's the author of Wide Sargasso Sea, which is the prequel to Jane Eyre. This is the story of Rochester's first wife. So you know what I'm reading next after that. Yeah. Okay, so you know that calendar events are very important to me, and this week was had a couple of big events in the history of Puerto Rico, one being the Massacre of P.R.O.M.E.S.A, which occurred on the 21st. In 1937, the Nationalist Party had received permission to march on Palm Sunday to commemorate the abolition of slavery and to celebrate Palm Sunday and to protest the recent arrest of the president of the Nationalist Party, Pedro Albizu Campo. And the permission was denied at the last minute by the governor at that time. And shooting ensued, and 19 or 20 people died, including one child, and 150 to 200 people were injured. So that was commemorated on Thursday. The abolition of slavery in 1873 is celebrated on the 22nd of March. And I went to an activity, and I took the grandsons there. There's a statue, and I hope to put the picture up here. There's a statue commemorating the abolition of slavery. And there was a small activity in commemoration of that. And I got to listen to people talk about the history of abolition in Puerto Rico, and it was so fascinating. I always learn something new. And about why that statue is there in that precise corner, triangular corner of P.R.O.M.E.S.A, and it was because that's where the freed slaves went to live, right? And according to the people who spoke on Friday, that's the only statue commemorating the abolition of slavery under the Spanish rule in all of the Caribbean. I'm going to look that up and research it and see if that's really true. But I was fascinated. And so in keeping, and another thing that I learned was that Hostos, remember Hostos? We talked about Hostos before. Hostos was working in Chile at the time when the abolition of slavery was announced, and he read the document. He read the law abolishing slavery, and he wrote 2 articles in the newspaper El Ferrocarril in Chile about what a fraud it was, the abolition. Because first of all, it called for slave owners to be, to receive payment for the loss of their property, while slaves didn't receive anything. To the contrary, the supposed freed slaves were supposed to sign a contract, work contracts for 3 years after the date of abolition, and they didn't have any political rights at all for 5 years after abolition. No. Yeah, so that was something new I never knew before. Yeah, and in keeping with the freedom of slaves and black people in Puerto Rico, I had been a few weeks back looking at different things in my favorite bookstore, and I found this book, this gigantic, beautiful tome that's called Negro Negra, Afirmación y Resistencia, Memorias del Primer Congreso de Afrodescendencia en Puerto Rico. This is the first Congress of descendants of Africans in Puerto Rico. It was celebrated in November of 2015, but I guess because of all the presentations and articles and essays that are inside this tome, it took a while to publish. It was published in Colombia, and it is a fantastic book. I skimmed through it, and it has articles in Spanish and in English. And for example, Giving a Voice. This is an article written by Carmen Milagros Torres Rivera, Giving a Voice to Afro-Puerto Ricans in Children's Literature. Yeah, I'm going to read that one for sure. And yeah, she says there, the only children's novel written in English identified in this study that deals directly with Afro-Puerto Rican issues is Bernier Grand's 1999 novel In the Shade of the Níspero Tree. That's the only one written in English that deals with the topic. And then there's cultural manifestations and artwork and all sorts of themes in this book. And I'm very glad to have seen that in El Candil in Ponce. And then found some books by an author who also emphasizes Afro-Latin issues, Yolanda Arroyo Pizarro, 2 children's books, 2 children's collections. One is a collection of stories, which is Las Caras Lindas. This one has, I think it's 1, 8, 9, 10 stories. 10 very, very short stories, because some of them are barely 1-2 pages long, dealing with those themes. And then this one is Capitán Cataño y las Trenzas Mágicas. And you turn it over, and it's in English. Captain Cataño and the Magical Cornrows. This is about a little boy who was taunted because of his hair, and how his mother deals with that situation. And it's a bilingual book. Has a few little errors. They could have used a little bit more editing, but I was glad to see it, always. And then in a drugstore, I found this, and I hope you can see it. The glare doesn't get to it. It's the first magazine, the first volume of this magazine, called Étnica. Conoce la Red Afro. Know the African network, our Afro network. And it starts off with, the little stylish fashion thing, right? Fashions, whatever. But then the rest of it are all the people of African descent in Puerto Rico who are doing things in Puerto Rico, important things. Who they are, where they work. It's a great networking publication. And some I know, and some are completely new to me. Fantastic. And then we have our authors. The one that I just mentioned, Yolanda Arroyo Pizarro, there she is. And then another author and novelist, Mayra Santos Febres. Yeah, so there they are. Just a few of them. And I hope they continue publishing. I know it's very difficult, and this is like a really glossy and beautiful magazine. I hope they continue publishing. Yeah, so that's what happened in the last 2 days of March. And then I told you last time that on the 24th, there's another sad commemoration this time. That's the 24th of March was when Monsignor Oscar Romero was assassinated while giving Mass in El Salvador. And yes, what I had wanted to share about Oscar Romero, as I was reading, I was remembering that I had seen a video at Jason's channel, Old Blues Chapter and Verse, in which he mentioned that a character in a movie had said, "We're killing each other over a piece of property." And this is what Oscar Romero had to say about land in El Salvador. This was on March 16th, the week before he was assassinated, giving Mass. At this time, when land in El Salvador is the object of conflict, let us not forget that the land is closely tied to God's blessings and promises. And then later on he continues, land reform is a theological necessity. A country's land cannot stay in a few hands. It must be given to all, and all must share in God's blessings on the land. And continues, each country has its own promised land in the territory that geography has allotted it. The land is a sign of justice and reconciliation. There will be no true reconciliation between our people and God as long as there is no just distribution, as long as the goods of the earth in El Salvador are not for the benefit and happiness of all Salvadorans. And as you can see, that is why he was assassinated while giving Mass in El Salvador. Let's continue. My Martha the Mammoth, as you know, is at Canaan's Edge, and I've gotten to the part where Vietnam is getting more and more to be an issue and to be discussed among people in the universities, in the colleges, even among the civil rights leaders. Martin Luther King has discussed it, and LBJ still wants to keep it a secret. And I've gotten to the part where Martin Luther King finds it necessary that he call the president and clarify his position on Vietnam. And it was a very, very eye-opening conversation, according to how Taylor Branch depicts it in the book. And if this keeps going like this, I might have to read a biography on LBJ. Despite what some people think about LBJ, I might have to wind up getting a book about it, because the things that happened during his presidency are to be remembered. That's the March of the Mammoths. They've taken the civil rights movement up to the north now, and they've gotten to Chicago, but haven't gotten to the march yet in Soldiers Field. I continued reading the nationalist heroines. I finished reading about Blanca Canales, who was the one who lifted the flag on in October 30th, 1950, during the insurrection all over Puerto Rico. And Blanca Canales was a social worker, the daughter of the first mayor of Jayuya, half-sister to a journalist, very renowned journalist, Nemesio Canales, in Puerto Rico. That's her when she was arrested. She's going to federal court for trial. And she was sentenced, and very long sentences, multiple life sentences. You know, she was never getting out of jail. Life plus 3 terms, additional terms. And so she was in West Virginia, in a women's facility there in West Virginia for 5.5 years, and then she continued serving time in Puerto Rico at a women's prison in Vega Alta. And she was pardoned in 1967, 10 years after the law under which most of the nationalists were condemned. After that law, 53, the gag law, was abolished. 10 years later, she was pardoned by the governor, Roberto Sanchez Vilella. She was 61 years old, riddled with all sorts of ailments, but she continued living for 29 more years. And then I read about Doña Leonides Diaz, who was completely innocent of anything in 1950. She was in her farm in Arecibo, and the only crime she committed was being the mother and the wife of nationalists. She was married to her husband, Raimundo Diaz, I think it was, and she had 2 sons who were nationalists and were involved in the insurrection. But she wasn't involved, but they threw her in jail anyway, and she served 7 years. And when the gag law, Law 53, was finally abolished, they set her free. Both of them were model prisoners, and especially Doña Leonides was very much respected by even the guards. There are several testimonies given by guards, prison guards, that absolutely loved her. She was quite an inspirational character, as was Blanca Canales. And then I continued reading the Insular Cases, and I'm almost done with the Insular Cases. I think I only have 2 left. I read the article by Bartholomew H. Sparrow, who has himself written a book, his own book, on the Insular Cases, called The Insular Cases and the Emergence of American Empire. I'm definitely going to read that after I read his article, because it was on point. He says here on page 40 that the U.S. government still systematically discriminates politically against those U.S. citizens who reside in Puerto Rico, the U.S. Virgin Islands, Guam, and the Northern Mariana Islands, as well as the U.S. nationals of American Samoa on the basis of geography, read strategic interests, notwithstanding the end of the de jure discrimination on the basis of race, religion, sex, and other ascriptive characteristics. Yeah, and his article is titled The Centennial of Ocampo versus the United States. Ocampo was one of the Insular Cases. In May 25th, 1914, ruled for a unanimous Supreme Court in Ocampo versus the United States that a resident of the Philippines was not entitled to a preliminary finding of probable cause before his arrest and trial. Yeah. And then I read another article by a person called Shimen L. Kaitner. These are all people who are professors of law in different institutions. And hers was very interesting because it talked about how the definition of free associated state had been mangled in our history because we are called in English a commonwealth, right? And in Spanish it's called Estado Libre Asociado. When you translate Estado Libre Asociado literally into English, it's called free associated state, and that under international law is something entirely, completely different from what in reality is the state of affairs in Puerto Rico. She says in her article that the Puerto Rican government used two different names, and I would differ to the extent that it's not just the Puerto Rican government who has done that and who has used those two terms. It's the United States government itself, because the Puerto Rican government can do nothing without Congress. Congress is the one that has plenary powers. The United States federal government has plenary powers over Puerto Rico. And the second thing she mentioned was that there was no such thing as a compact, which was another issue that would be raised to disguise the supposed Commonwealth of Puerto Rico that was instigated in 1952, which was why the nationalists went up in arms in 1950 and then again in 1954, because they considered it a fraud, because nothing fundamentally changed in 1952 when the Commonwealth, or el Estado Libre Asociado, was inaugurated. So people were duped. But the one that really entertained me and I had a lot of fun with was Andres W. Lopez's presentation. It's called Our Journey is Not Complete. And I've highlighted this everywhere. And he starts with his little digs at Harvard. He's a graduate of Harvard, as a matter of fact, Andres W. Lopez. Because the whole conference of 2014 gives hope that just as Harvard played an all too prominent role in paving the way for the insular cases in the 20th century, Harvard and its modern-day alumni can help eradicate the dishonorable legacy of the insular cases in the 21st century. That's what he hopes. And then he goes on to talk about how the economic debacle in Puerto Rico, our debt, has turned up in the news in 2014 and even before. We were called the Caribbean Greece. And how the Obama administration believes that the two, the political and the economic, are inextricably intertwined. Indeed, it argues that the most effective means of assisting the Puerto Rican economy depends on resolving the ultimate question of status. And then I have my two little eyes there, the little bulging eyes. I go, huh? This is coming from the Obama administration. Obama administration was the one that gave us P.R.O.M.E.S.A. And P.R.O.M.E.S.A is a junta, is a non-elected body that is going to determine and take over all decisions in Puerto Rico and implant all austerity measures. There's already a flood of people leaving the island because of this situation. So yeah, I was very entertained by Andres Lopez, who in 2014 was waxing poetic about what the Obama administration was doing and thinking about our political status, while at the same time, P.R.O.M.E.S.A is what we actually got in 2016. And not only did we get P.R.O.M.E.S.A, the junta, but we also got another Supreme Court case in which it was determined without a shadow of a doubt that Congress still has plenary powers over Puerto Rico in every single case. That's what I've been reading, and I hope to finish with the insular cases and keep reading on because it's very important. So, adiós mi gente. Cuídense mucho. Adiós.